Hi, this is Andy. One of the many things I love about hosting the People and Projects podcast is the opportunity to provide you leadership insights week after week, allowing you to grow as a leader over time. Because clearly, you don't become a leader simply by taking a class, right? I mean, it's about learning over time through everyday opportunities that come along. I think one of the challenges to growing into an excellent leader is just all the noise. In the busyness and stress of everyday life, a significant lesson can be right in front of me, but I miss it if I'm not tuned in to capturing the lesson and reflecting on it and making it my own. I bring this up because I'm excited to introduce you to Scott Millson. Scott's the author of a new book entitled Frequency of Excellence, Tuning In to Everyday Lessons of Life and Leadership. It's a book of lessons gleaned from Scott's successful career of leading organizations. If you pick up a copy of the book, I think you'll find what I did. It has short chapters that are filled with lessons that you will relate to and can apply to everyday challenges that you face at work and in life. In today's discussion, I'll be introduced to some of those lessons, including how to find a mentor, even if your organization doesn't have a formal mentorship program. Ever feel nervous before a big presentation? Well, of course you have, and Scott will talk about how he overcame that fear over time. We'll talk about the difference between excellence and perfection and how Scott has learned to deal with pressure and stress. Before we're done, you'll even learn an important Latin phrase and how ADD might just be your superpower instead of a liability. I can't wait to share this discussion with you. Hey, quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a global group of leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week. It's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into our discussion with Scott about his book, Frequency of Excellence. So, Scott, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. It seems like schools are optimized, at least as a parent, from my perspective, a lot of times for kids who sit still. And we've had some that were like that and some that were not even remotely like that. Stay quiet until you're called on. And that's not how young Scott Millson would have been described, as I understand from the book, right? So perhaps in today's world, I wonder, would you have been diagnosed with something like attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder? I wonder, how close did I get to describing young Scott? And in what ways has your wiring actually been a superpower for you?
Yeah, it's as if you were a fly on the wall of my classroom in the early days. And so, I think, back in the day, I think when I grew up in the 1970s and 80s. And, I don't think that was necessarily a diagnosis that was tossed around a lot. It was just, well, you're just a hyper kid.
Right.
You're a disruption in the classroom. And so, I may or may not have been sent to the principal's office once or twice for disrupting a class, or, I kind of channeled that into being a bit of a, class clown. And so, those things I think did hamper some of my growth early on. But, I think it was just, you kind of overcome those things. And so, I think as I grew and developed, I did turn it into more of a superpower. I really dislike the fact that that's called a disorder.
Yeah.
I think in the history of medical professions, I think it's second only, that calling that a disorder is second only to my wife when she was pregnant with our children, got diagnosed with an incompetent cervix, and she was pregnant.
Incompetent.
And calling a pregnant woman incompetent is never a good idea.
Right.
But I digress. But I do think calling that a disorder, I think is doing a disservice. And so, I did see it as more of a superpower for me. And so my ability to hyper focus is probably more of what I have. And I did. I really channeled that into hyper focusing. And I knew in my career that I was never going to be the smartest person in the room, but I can guarantee you I was going to outwork anybody, and I could sit there and work on a problem longer than most. And I was going to bring it to some type of a solution, and quicker than, or maybe not quicker, but definitely I'm going to get there with over time. And so I did kind of channel that into kind of a superpower for myself. And as I began my career, I joined a small, well, it wasn't that small, about 3,000 company consultancy in Chicago called Hewitt Associates. And, anybody that reads my book, you'll see that is the true foundation of who I am and the people that I surrounded myself and the people that the excellence that was just I was surrounded by, was something that really just, kind of spurred my career. And so I did channel that into, I was going to become, I wanted to make partner, and I was going to outwork anybody to get there. And I was lucky enough to do that. And, but I did think I used my superpower to help me get there.
I seem to, it was an early chapter, I think, when you talked about inattentional blindness. Is that the term?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know that much about attention and the variations of it, but is it more likely that you'd be so focused you wouldn't pick up on the other stuff? Or is it that you would maybe by nature pick up on the other stuff? So actually, if you wouldn't even mind just maybe telling the Dr.
Sure.
Nolte story, if I remember right.
Very good. Good memory. Yeah. So it is chapter 1. So I go through an introduction to my book, kind of a little bit of a background. In chapter 1, I jump right into the title is Don't Miss the Banana or the Gorilla. And it does come from it. So for me personally, I was in high school, and I had a teacher who was a wonderful teacher. And again, being ADHD, I think, I needed those lessons that was going to be interactive and different ways for me to go about learning. And this teacher, I think everybody has one of those teachers that were just, wonderful for them. And for me, it was Dr. Nolte. He was a teacher of history in my high school. And he pulled me aside one morning and said, "I'd like you to participate in a lesson today." And he said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get in the classroom. I'm going to take one side of an argument, and I want you to jump in and immediately take the other side of the argument. And I want you to take it to a 10, 1 out of 10. I want you to take it to a 10 quickly." And he said, "The only thing you can't do is we're not going to use profane language, and you're not going to take any personal shots at me, and I will do the same. But I want it to be heated." He goes, "I really want people focused on you and our argument of what's going on." And so we did, and I thought I gave an Oscar-worthy performance. And all eyes were trained on me. I had people kind of sitting around me like, "Stop it, like, shut up, what are you doing?" And it was going to go on for about 5 minutes. And he then sent me out of the room, said he was sending me to the principal's office, maybe one more time, sending me to the principal or the dean's office for insubordination. And so as I exited the room, he asked everybody to take out a sheet of paper, and he asked everybody to write down exactly what had just happened. And then he called me back in, and he collected all the papers, and he said, "I want everybody to write this down because I'm going to use that in what I send along to the dean to describe this insubordination." And so I come back in the room, and he says that it was a fabricated dispute, that I'm not in trouble, that he had asked me to do that. And he said also the person that got up out of their chair to eat the banana was also part of the lesson. And the room fell eerily quiet, and everybody said, "What person ate a banana?" And just didn't see it. And so, this was in the early 1980s. And so it was before Arian Mack and Irvin Rock had come up with the term inattentional blindness. But it is that we are so focused on other things going on around us sometimes that we miss certain things. And the objective of the lesson was to talk about how bad we are as witnesses, kind of eyewitnesses. But again, it was before the term was actually coined, but coming up with this term of inattentional blindness, that's essentially what he was saying and trying to get us to understand. And then there was a study later on when they kind of did this about a gorilla. People may recall this, with 2 Harvard professors did a study that they basically asked 6 people to join in a room and dressed in white, and some were dressed in black, and they were passing a ball about the room. And you were supposed to count the number of times that the ball was passed. And then they would ask everybody at the end, how many times was it passed? And they would also ask, did you see the gorilla? And unbeknownst to anybody in the study, a gorilla walked through the middle of the study, pounded their chest, and walked off. And 50% of people didn't see it. And so I think, all that said is I think inattentional blindness sometimes can just cause us to not pick up on the things going on around us. And in today's world, we are celebrating people for multitasking, to be able to keep 20 balls in the air, and the people listening to this podcast with all their projects that they're managing, et cetera. Sometimes we're rewarded off of being able to do so many things. And my career was characterized by excellence, not by anything I was able to do, but by the people I surrounded myself. And I just had to be smart enough to sit there and watch, listen, and learn. And whether you want to call it the ADHD, the inattentional blindness, I was able to kind of pick up on these things and store them for later use. I think a little bit better than most because I had that ability.
Yeah, I love the idea you have of reflective leadership or reflective collection or whatever. It's like capturing these, like people running projects, we know about lessons learned, but they often get archived, like in a place you never call back to them. And if we can just hold on to them. And I really resonate with this idea of the inattentional blindness, because even the day that I picked up to read your book, I got to get prepped for the interview. I'm looking, I've got a pretty organized system of books I've yet to read, books I've read yet, but the episode hasn't come out. And I'm looking, I'm like, I don't see the book, but I know I got a copy. Maybe send a PDF. I'm looking all over. I look at my shelf like 4 times. And it's the 5th time there's like, it's right there. And I just think, like, how could I have missed that? It's almost like if I got my glasses up on my head and I'm like, I can't find my glasses, you know? And I think too often we're like, we miss these signals. And that's actually one of the, you know, messages that runs through your book. There's this notion of radio signals and frequencies and a dial. And I'd be curious if you'd be up for telling people how you were first introduced to this idea of frequencies and a dial and how it's proven just to be so helpful over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was actually a mentor of mine, a mentor that became a very good friend, a gentleman by the name of John Rivers. And John kind of introduced this concept to me. And it was in a different context. It wasn't necessarily originally in a professional context, but I kind of adapted it for the professional context. And that was, at any moment of any day, excellence is out there. You just have to be tuned into the right frequency in order to see it. So, you know, you could be standing in line at a Starbucks and you could watch an interaction between a barista and a customer and go, okay, hustle this up. Like I'm ready to get to the front of the line. I need to make my payment. You two stop talking and, you know, move on. And instead, you can kind of witness that interaction and say, that interaction was excellent. You know, watching the customer service that may have been displayed at that and watching the barista go above and beyond and do something that was a little bit different, right? And so I just think our ability to kind of witness excellence is out there. It's like a radio wave. We can't see the packets of data and information that are running around us right now, right? As we sit here, we've got them, they're flying over us, through us, under us, and yet we can't see them. But if you've got some type of a WLAN card or a cell phone device, something to kind of capture that, or in the old days, an AM FM radio dial, if you remember that. Yeah. But you know, you had to be dialed into the right frequency in order to pick it up. Otherwise, it's just static. Otherwise, you can't pick up on it. And so that was really the message that John gave me, is just be in a growth mindset and be looking for those things. Look for the opportunity to grow and to find the excellence around you. And you'll be surprised at how frequently they're there. But when you've got that growth mindset, there's excellence that is just coming at you every moment of every day. And you just got to be able to then store that, to your point, store that for future use, because you're going to need it some point down the road.
Yeah. I think of the old days when you're trying to find, I want something, I want some classical music or something like that. And you're turning the dial, like, that's not it. Yeah. But as soon as you start hearing something like, oh, I think we're getting close. And I think so many of my days, if I'm not careful, Scott, I'm not stopping to go, oh, maybe I'm like stop and just take a moment. Is there a lesson here? Yeah. And I think if we recognize that, hey, this might be a teaching moment for me or for someone on my team, this might be a learning moment. Like, don't lose this lesson right now, you know? And I think it's cool. You learned this from a mentor, and you certainly talk about, I think officially or unofficially, you would say you've had 50 or more. You've had lots of mentors over the years, and maybe one of the more common misconceptions of mentors that they have to be formalized, right? So tell us why we sometimes think that, and why is it so important to have these mentors?
Yeah, I just think, you know, they help pave the way for us, right? They've experienced something that we haven't experienced. They've done something, they've achieved something, whatever that may be. There's beauty in that. There's a lesson to be learned in that. And we just need to be able to, you know, build those relationships so that those come at us and they're more willing to share that information with us. You know, I think, you know, John Maxwell famously once said that, you know, the people closest to me determine my level of success or failure. The better they are, the better I am. And so I just, you know, again, I started my career with Hewitt Associates, and the number of incredible leaders, managers, consultants, salespeople, communicators, I just had to be smart enough to watch them. And again, I never at Hewitt Associates, never went up to somebody and said, hey, will you be my mentor? Which would be like the natural thing, right? I think it's a yes, no, it's a binary. Will you be my mentor? Yes or no. And instead, what I would do is I would just watch, and I would sit back and learn. And the people that I really wanted to kind of, you know, going off of John Maxwell's quote, the people I really wanted to surround myself with, the people that I thought did something exceptionally well. And I've just befriended them, and I just would spend more time with them. And I would just, you know, I would try to sign up for projects that they were on, and I tried to be on a client that they were working on. And I just wanted to sit back and just observe their excellence and store that, again, as we talked about, store it for downstream use. And so I knew that a high tide raises all boats, and I wanted to be part of that raise of the tide. And so, I really just am so appreciative of every mentor that I've ever had, whether it was formal or informal. Again, I don't think I ever went up to somebody and asked that question, but I have a slew of mentors of people that I still call on to this day. One of my mentors lives in Chicago, is a guy by the name of John Bausch. He and I worked together at Hewitt, and we had a phenomenal relationship. There wasn't a time, probably in about a 15-year window, that I wasn't faced with something I was thinking about doing that I didn't pick up the phone and call John. And I would say, John, here's what I'm thinking. And more often than not, it was really funny. I would go to him and say, here's A, B, and C of what I'm thinking about doing. And he would come at me and said, yeah, you need to look at X, Y, and Z. And so totally taken in a different direction, offering advice that I didn't see. And that's the power of mentorship, is that, they know more than I know. And I'm smart enough to recognize that. And I want to learn from them. And so, I'm so appreciative of those mentors that I've worked with that graciously shared their frequency with me. And I, in turn, want to try to share that with others now.
Yeah, that's what your book is. Even as you're saying that, a woman named Sue comes to mind that early in my project management career, she didn't fit the mold of what you think of sometimes as a project manager. Like, wasn't a driving, extroverted, it's just very introverted, kind of a quieter, but amazing. Like, if I just noticed, like, whatever she did, write it down. Yeah. She's got a process, she got structure. And even to this day, when I watch other people giving presentations, I like to watch, what do they do? How do they go about doing it? And you can learn. We're like, to your point, we're learning all the time. And a common fear for people with presentations is being, they're fearful, right? They're afraid. And you had to overcome that. And part of it is what you refer to now in the book as the Ulysses contract. Would you kind of give us an idea of how you overcame that and what that contract is?
Yeah, so I have some deep scars on this one, and now my career, I'm now kind of with my launching of my book. The second part I'm looking to do now is I get into, and I'm doing a lot more keynote speaking. And so you would think that this would not be on my dance card, that I've ever had a fear of public speaking, but I did, and it came out of nowhere. It was 1993, I believe, 1993 or 1994, and I was working for Hewitt up in New Jersey, up in the East region. And at the time, the East region recruiting team reached out and asked, some of the junior people in the organization, would you join our campus recruiting team? And I was just enamored with Hewitt. I loved my time there. I really enjoyed my own campus recruitment. So I was like, sure, I'll raise my hand. The first gig that I had was at Villanova University. So if anybody listened to this podcast, graduated from Villanova in 1994, you may remember this guy who kind of wet himself on a stage at Villanova. But I'm literally, standing up. They had us come in the night before we were going to do the interview, and they had everybody come up and tell a little bit about themselves and their organization. And I showed no signs of any fear of this at all, right? And they call me up, and I go stand before the stage, and my mind went blank, and my palms went sweaty, my mouth went dry, I went flushed in the face. I mean, you name it, I was experiencing it. And I fought my way through it, and I didn't see it coming, but I had developed a fear of public speaking. And so I came back from that session kind of demoralized a bit, and trying to figure out where this thing came from. And I would say I used three things to kind of make sure that I overcame this fear. The first one was kind of a physical manifestation. I found a Far Side calendar within about 2 weeks of me having that situation. And if anybody remembers Far Side calendar, just a hysterically funny comic strip. Yeah. And this one was about Tarzan. And so it was Tarzan swinging through the jungle about to meet Jane. And as he's swinging through through the jungle, he's trying to perfect his speech. And he's saying things like, hello, Jane, my name is Tarzan. It is wonderful to meet you. I've heard so much about you. And the next one is similar. And then he gets right before her, and then he goes, me, Tarzan, you, Jane. And I was like, that's me. Like, that happened to me. I thought I was perfected this talk I was going to give. And all of a sudden it turned into me, Tarzan, you, Jane. And so I literally ripped that off of a tear-off calendar, posted it on my mirror, and that became a physical reminder on a daily basis of the fear that I wanted to overcome. The second one for me was kind of a mindset of the obstacle is the way, and stoicism. There's a whole separate thing. We can go down a rabbit hole there, but and it was before Ryan Holiday came out with that book, but I really saw that as that became, that was going to be the impediment for my advancement was going to be, I was going to use that to help overcome that. And so, and then the third one was the Ulysses contract. And so I went to my manager at the time, a guy by the name of Scott Bradley. And I said, Scott, I didn't see this coming. I have a fear of public speaking, but I need you to put me back up on stage. I need you to put me in front of clients. I need you to keep doing that. And, Ulysses' contract is it's rooted in Greek mythology, and it's about the Iliad and the Odyssey, if anybody remembers that from middle school, literature. But basically, Odysseus was coming back from, his war, the Trojan War, which they had successfully won. And he knew that as he went by this island that was filled with these beautiful sirens, that they were going to sing this, they were going to enchant him, and he was going to get close to the rocky shore and was going to sink the ship. It had happened thousands of times. And he knew that, and he told his crew, he said, I'm going to tie myself to the mast, and no matter what I say, do not listen to what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to stay the course and get us back home. Because it was a commitment device. He basically said to them, I know I'm going to basically fool my future self I know that I'm not going to be able to, to stay away from that island. So I'm telling you guys now, don't allow me to do that. And that was what I essentially did with Scott. As I said, just keep putting me back up on stage. I need you to keep doing that. There's going to be some me Tarzan, you Janes that's going to come spilling out of my mouth, but just please don't lose faith in me and keep putting me back out there. And it did. And so I was able to kind of overcome that.
Like it. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's another put me back in, coach, even after you make a bad shot or whatever. It's like,
that's right.
It's like we're going to force ourselves in. And, that is a route to excellence. And that's what your book is about in many respects. I'm curious because you talk about this a little bit in the book, the difference between excellence and perfection, because I think sometimes we can get that mixed up, that like my boss is never satisfied, right? And so what are some examples to help us understand the difference?
Yeah, they're actually diametrically opposed. Excellence and perfection are very different. Excellence is kind of an intrinsically motivated. It's spurring you on to want to achieve more. And perfectionism does the exact opposite. Perfection can suck the life out of you. Perfectionism can suck the life out of you. And let's be honest, perfection is not attainable. It's just not. It's a goal. It's a 3-minute mile. You're not going to try to run that. No matter how hard you train, you're never going to get there. But excellence can be. Excellence is that intrinsically motivated that you want to try to achieve that. And so, for me, when I talk about excellence, the way I define it is when I see excellence, it motivates me, it inspires me, it gives me a shot of dopamine. And so, as throughout my book, when I witnessed excellence, I saw something and I said, that was great. I want to replicate that. I want to have more of that. And it gives me that shot of dopamine. And so it's something that reward pathway that I want to see over and over again. And so I know that perfectionism is there. I mean, a good example is writing a book. I could still be sitting in the editing process by trying to perfect every single word and making sure that every semicolon was where it needed to be and every colon was there. And I could drive myself absolutely bananas in trying to make that perfect. And I finally got to a point was like, I think this is good enough. And, I still pride myself. I don't think there's any typos in it or any, but I know it's not perfect because I can't get there. It's an imperfect perfection. And it's just something I'm not going to be able to attain. So my goal was to have it be excellent. And hopefully I've been able to achieve that.
Yeah. And, I guess a message I took away from the book is that you don't drift to excellence. You don't, in fact, you probably drift to, mediocrity is maybe overstating it, but it's like you stay hungry, but not for perfection. You stay hungry to learn, like growth mindset, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. It's just, again, when you see that excellence, when you're dialed in, when you're tuned into the frequency and you see excellence, when it gives you that kind of shot of dopamine, again, you want to replicate that. And then you want to be, the beautiful thing about, the kind of my career, et cetera, is it's now time for me to kind of share that with others. And so I'm really excited that hopefully over my career, people have had a shot of dopamine in watching how I did something or how I, approached something. And so I'm just very appreciative of the mentors that helped me. And now it's time for me to kind of share that out with others.
Yeah. And your excellence stride now is how to market books and how to speak to groups in a way that helps them really understand it. So it's another, even though you're giving back more, there's still lots to learn, even to this day. It's actually pretty cool.
Continual growth mindset. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Stress and pressure are often frequent companions for those who lead teams and projects, right? So when your stress seems to reach an unhealthy level or you're faced with a difficult decision, what have you learned to do, Scott?
Yeah, I would say the main thing I do is take a step back and reflect. Because again, whether it be a mentor, whether it be something I've experienced, when I'm faced with a challenging situation, I know that it can be overcome because, graveyards are full of indispensable people that, think, oh, well, we can't get by without this person or that,
right.
And so, I know that we can overcome things. The sun will rise again in the morning, even though you think that the world is coming to an end. And so I just reflect on those times that I've seen a mentor overcome something, or I've seen, and it doesn't always have to be a mentor. It could be a parent, and I've had a situation, and I talk about this in my book, as a child. I've got a daughter who, if I were to describe her, I'd think I'd describe her like any good father would. And I would say, she's beautiful and she's got a great way about her. She's loved by many people. There's two things I would say that are probably a little bit different. I think one is she curses like a sailor, but I blame her brothers for that one. And the second thing is she's epileptic. And so I've got a daughter that has been diagnosed with epilepsy, kind of came about later in her life at age 17. And, she's a girl of three boys. So there's four in our family. And so she had her own room growing up. And her seizures initially were all at night. And so we didn't know how long she had this, but we kind of, when we identified it, we went through and met with all the doctors and got all the diagnoses and all the tests run, et cetera. And she had a second seizure. So she had her first one. We're running through all that with the doctors. We're in a bad place. We're really upset. I'm mad at life. Again, kind of that stress and pressure is coming at me. And then she gives me that moment of reflection. And so she had her second ever seizure. She stayed home from work or from school the next day. I'm walking through the family room, and I probably broke some HIPAA law looking over her shoulder. But I looked over her shoulder, and she's typing out motivational phrases to hang on her wall. And so here I am wallowing in self-pity. I'm angry. I'm upset. I've got a lot of emotions that are running through me. I'm not seeing how we're going to move forward. I'm just really stuck. And here's my 17-year-old daughter who's given me words of encouragement and sharing with me how I need to be overcoming stress and pressures and things like that in my life. And so what she was writing is, she said, when things seem to be falling apart, they may be falling into place. And that's what captured my eye as I walked past her. And so that has served now for me is a mantra for me. When I get into a situation, I reflect on how Rose overcame that. I reflect on those words. When things seem to be falling apart, they may be falling into place. And I'm motivated, and it spurs me on. And I think if she can kind of work through that in the way that she did, it gives me, encourages me to do the same. And so that's when I think, for people that it may not be as something as dramatic as a child with with an ailment such as that, or a diagnosis, but it could be anything. If you've seen a coworker, you've seen somebody work through something on their own and how they approached it, that motivates me. That's being tuned into their excellence to be able to pick up on that and add that for downstream utilization.
Yeah. As I read that part, it reminded me of a friend who he's known for saying, things don't happen to you, they happen for you. And all these have the risk of being kind of smarmy or just like cliche, but if it's a different reframe, right? Like what can I do with this? Yeah. Is there an opportunity here? And is there another way to look at it? And so I appreciate that. I can see how that lesson has served you well. I think you also said in the book that you like to get out in nature sometimes when you're feeling stressed.
Yeah. An interesting scenario. So it was actually last year. So in 2023, I was in one of the more difficult storms of my career. It was tough. There was a lot of stress and pressure coming at me. And I was really kind of struggling with why things were happening and what could I have done differently to try to make them better. And so, usually when that happens to me is I got to go for a walk. Back in the day, I've got hip arthritis now, so I can't run anymore. That used to be my therapy. But now I just, I take the dog for a walk, and we've got a beautiful lake that's about half a mile from here. And I was out walking the dog one afternoon and really struggling with, why is all this happening? And all of a sudden, as I turned a corner, I'm reminded of Rose. And I said, when things seem to be falling apart, they may be falling into place. And that totally changed my perspective. Everything changed for me in that moment. And I then was able to, whether it be the fresh air, whatever it was, something took me back to that, looking over her shoulder and seeing that message on her computer screen. And it just totally gave me a different perspective. And from that point forward, things didn't seem to be as dramatically difficult and insurmountable that they once seemed to be. Yeah.
Love that. Sometimes I have a problem not speaking up. I can think of times in my life as well as other people. They probably should have spoken up. Other times we're droning on when we need to be more concise. So tell us about a lesson you learned from a consultant who told you a Latin phrase that stuck with you.
Yeah. And I don't know Latin. I mentioned it earlier. I grew up in a small North Florida town. They did not teach me Latin in high school. And even if they had, I probably wouldn't have resonated and stuck with me. But so I was a junior consultant at the time. I'm working out of our Hewitt, New Jersey office. And I'm working with a senior partner with a gentleman by the name of Mark Arian. And we were preparing for a meeting in New York City. And we're in a small conference room. And I remember he was kind of running through the meeting with me. And he asked me a question. He said, okay, if they ask you this question, tell me how you were going to respond. So a little bit of kind of role playing there. And so he threw out a question, and I gave what I thought was a phenomenal answer. And it was long, and it was long-winded, and it went all over the place. I'm kind of reminded of an Office episode when Michael Scott when he talks about an improvisation, that he starts a sentence and he doesn't know where it's going until he finds footing in it. And that's kind of what I was doing, but I was piecing together, big words like, strategy and all these different things, strategization. And so I'm pulling all this together, and I thought it was a really spot on answer, and it was very long. And he just sat there very politely and just, was nodding. And when I finished, he just smiled at me and he said, "Et Loqueris Ad." And I was like, what? What does that mean? And he goes, it's a Latin phrase that means speak with a purpose. And I said, okay, unpack that for me, because I'm not sure I'm following where you're going there. And he said, look, when you speak, there's a currency to your words, and you need to treat them as if there's a currency. And he said, when you speak, there needs to be a specific thesis to what you're trying to say. Don't just speak, just don't throw words together. Don't do a Michael Scott and try to do this improvisation, but truly try to speak with a purpose. Know what your intended purpose is to be, and then speak in that direction. I think I used to think of it as, whether it be presentations, answering questions, et cetera, was kind of a competitive sport. And he who spoke the most won. And that's the exact opposite. I think it's he who speaks or she speaks with the most purpose wins. And so it doesn't need to be this long soliloquy. It can be a short, very pointed response to something. And as long as you're staying on purpose, then I think you're hitting the mark. And so, it was a kind of career changing moment for me, because up until that point, as I said, I used to just throw a bunch of words together. And then I think from that point forward, I always kind of heard Mark in my ear whispering "Et Loqueris Ad." Now that I understand a little bit of Latin, that's about it. But it worked for me. And I have shared that lesson with so many people over my career, people that I was coaching and teams that I was leading. I would, tell people, hey, as we're going to this meeting, speak with a purpose.
I love it. I think it's a good example of how vocabulary matters. Like if you have a word, or in this case, a phrase, then it's easier to recognize it because you got something in your mind to kind of hang it on. And that's what a lot of these lessons are. I mean, the book is filled with these lessons that once you hear the term or get the idea or the illustration, it sticks. And there's so many lessons that we haven't touched on, but let me end with this, Scott. We've got a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Can you think of any frequencies or lessons that drove how you and your wife, Kristen, led at home to develop excellence in your kids or maybe even in your family?
Yeah, so it was interesting as I sat down to write this book and told my family that I was doing it, and they were my edits, they were my critics, they were my editors. I would, come up with a lesson slash chapter and would share it with them.
Mhm.
I would say, hey, what do y'all think about this? And sometimes it was met with a bit of an eye roll because they're like, Dad, we've heard this lesson 1,000 times.
Right.
So there is, I think there's a very interesting parallel that exists between parenting and managing and leading.
Yeah.
Because, and look, I'm not trying to, say, that they're exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities into them.
Mhm.
When you're leading a team or you're working within a team, you're trying to set a culture. And when you're leading your family, you're trying to set a culture. And here's what we believe. And here's what the foundation of the things that we believe and what's important to us as a family. And so I think there is a lot of kind of crossover there between leadership and parenting. And so I do think a lot of the lessons that I share within the book, that's why I titled the book, Lessons of Life and Leadership, because I think there's a lot of this crossover that exists. But, if there was two chapters, that if I were to call them out kind of from within the book, is one was taught to me while I was in the Navy. So I spent the early part of my career in the U.S. Navy. I basically was forced with a challenge. My parents asked me to pay for 50% of my schooling, and I wasn't making enough money. And so I joined the Navy to help pay for school. And so I used that as a way, but a lesson that was taught to me. And again, you kind of led with a lot of the lessons are just hidden in plain sight. They're just there.
Right.
And one of them was taught to me. I was learning how to fold underwear in the Navy. And our company commander, a gentleman by the name of Chief Raymond Burrows, was teaching us how to fold our underwear. And I thought this was the most controlling, over the top, like ridiculousness ever. And I asked him, I said, Chief, why is it so important that you're teaching us how to fold our underwear? And he responded and he said, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I didn't really know what he meant. And so we kind of asked him to go a little bit deeper. And he was like, look, at some point y'all are going to be out in the fleet and you're going to be doing an inspection of an aircraft. You're going to be doing a walk around before an aircraft takes off. And if you just kind of half-heart something, lives are in danger. Multi-million-dollar aircrafts could potentially go down. So you have to be, kind of really aim for excellence in what you're doing, even if it's silly as folding underwear. So he wasn't teaching us how to fold underwear, but he was teaching us how to live our lives in a way that is excellent. And so to strive for that excellence. And so, I share that with my kids all the time growing up. When they were mowing the lawn, it was how you do anything is how you do everything. You missed a spot, go back out there and hit that, and so there was a lot of lessons I think that are within the book that I think you can share within children as well. That I think the second one, and it's the last chapter of my book, is, above all else, choose family. And for us, family is everything in our family. And there was a moment in my career where my wife was very good about holding up a mirror and helping me remember that. And you'll have to read the book to get there. I won't give away the punchline on that one, but it above all else, choose family, because family is why we do the things that we do and why we lead projects and why we lead teams, et cetera, and we do so for our families. And so that was a great lesson that my wife kind of reminded me of, and I'm appreciative of her for doing that.
I know a couple of people that worked at Hewitt, and they said there's a reason why Hewitt gives free food for lunch and dinner, because you're supposed to work through dinner. Right?
100%. Yeah.
So read the last chapter to get all the details here, but you're gonna love Scott even more. For those listening, this is just an introduction, actually just a brief introduction to the type of practical insights you can get from Scott's book. To learn more, get a copy of Frequency of Excellence by Scott Millson. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, hey, Scott, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Really appreciate it.